6:32 and start with our roll call. I'll call your name, please say here if you're here. Claire Syrett.
I'm here.
Andrew Buck.
I'm here.
Heather Buck. Kelly Sutherland.
Here.
Rob Zako.
Here.
Scooter Milne.
Here.
Tiffany Edwards.
Here.
Bill Johnson.
Here.
Is Jack here? Okay. Yes, Jack's okay. Paul Comery.
Here.
Sarah Mazzy. Here. And Peter Submit.
Here.
Thanks, everyone. All right. We will go ahead and move on now to if there's anyone here for public comment.
We have no in-person or online.
Wonderful. Oh, let's move to staff updates.
Great. Thank you. I'm Dave Roth, Director of Planning at LTD. For the benefit of some of our guests or folks I haven't met yet, first off, I want to welcome some of our newly appointed members. So the way our bylaws are set up, we have certain members that are appointed by other agencies. So that includes City of Eugene Council as well as City of Springfield Council. So we have officially now Mayor Knudsen from City of Eugene is appointed as a member of SBC. She's not here tonight. We also have Councilor Buck. Thanks for being here tonight, newly appointed from City of Springfield. And then we also have Bill Johnson, who was appointed by the LTD board officially. I know you were here last time, but thanks for being here in official capacity this time. I also wanted to mention that we do have some members whose first terms are coming up at the end of June. So that's Alma, Heather, and Scooter. So we should talk maybe offline on whether or not you're interested in continuing. I think you're eligible for additional terms, so we can talk through that. And then also I can work with Alma and Tiffany on talking about roles on the committee as well, so we can do that offline. Wanted to mention that we do have LTD's first budget committee meeting coming up on March 9th, so next week. Is that right?
March 31st.
Sorry, March 31st. Okay, I was looking at an old calendar. I thought that might have been wrong. March 31st, our first budget committee meeting. So prep on the LTD budget is underway right now. And of course, that goes to the board this summer. It needs to be adopted before July. So if you're interested in looking at LTD's budget and sort of following that process, it's a good opportunity to get it involved. Also, if there's interest, we could potentially have a budget item in front of SBC. If there is interest, we could potentially do that in May, just sort of like a summary of the process. And I'm happy to do that. All right, a few other just announcements. Back in February, the MPC, the Metropolitan Policy Committee, approved some federal flexible funds for members, agencies within the metro area, and LTD had submitted funding requests through that, and we were awarded funding that will be available starting in FY28. So that funding is specifically going to 3 projects. So the first one is our transit and shared mobility integration project, where we've already got some STIF funding set aside for that work. And now we have an additional $800,000 coming in federal funds to support that work. And again, that's looking at the regional bike share system and upgrading and the system and integrating with transit. So there is a study underway right now that we'll get in front of this committee in May for an update on that study that should inform the next iteration of bike share. What does that look like? How does it integrate with LTD services? And then we'll also have funding that we can put towards that project in FY28. The next one is transit signal priority project. So we talked about this when we went on our tour. I think we even experienced it where we were traveling westbound on 6th, and we got hung up at Garfield because we missed our transit signal priority trigger, and the operator had to call into operations to get permission to go around the corner there. And so we're looking at the whole MX system. There's to upgrade that to the next generation of technology that's out there. It's cloud-based and it's tied to the GPS locations of the vehicles. So that technology was not around when we implemented MX, but it's here now and it's being implemented in transit agencies across the country. And so we've got, I think, $500,000 in federal funding to go towards that project starting again in FY28. And there's quite a bit of project development work that needs to happen before we can actually start spending money. So we're working on that right now. LCOG is going to be supporting a small project to get that started soon. And then the last one that we were awarded funding for was for our fare system upgrades. So we've got a significant chunk of STIF funding set aside for that project, but now we're also bringing some federal funds, $600,000 to add to that. And that would be to upgrade our whole fare management system and back end. So hopefully easier student pass administration, open payments so people can just tap to pay with a credit card or their phone. Some of the things that you might have experienced if you've gone to a larger city or traveled and used transit in Europe or Japan, where you can just tap your card to go. More coming there. Several other projects are either started or just about to get started. So corridor studies. So we're partnering with City of Eugene on a corridor study looking at River Road and Highway 99. There's been quite a bit of conversation on that work so far. BEST has done a lot of early engagement with the neighborhoods around those corridors, and I believe there's a consultant on contract now, and the project should get started
Pretty soon.
soon. Okay. All right. So we're very close to get those.
Remind us who the consultant is?
I don't know if we can announce that.
We can.
Oh, we can. Okay.
Prime will be parametrics, and they have a sub-consultant called Zans, outside of Portland, that does speak.
Yeah. So you'll be hearing a lot more about those projects. So LTD is funding the work and the City of Eugene is delivering the work. And it makes a lot of sense because the city is the roadway owner. There's also some interaction with ODOT, so we'll get into that later when the project starts. Next one is there's a project that is a federally funded project that the City of Eugene was awarded funds for. This is called the Safe Streets and Roads for All First Last Mile Transit Study. And this is another one that is, they're in the consultant selection process right now. That'll get underway soon. And this project actually ties in really nicely with one of the agenda items tonight, which is the ADA bus stop project. So you'll hear a lot more about that. So the ADA bus stop evaluation is really just focused on the stops themselves. And then the Safe Streets and Roads for All project sort of broadens that scope and looks beyond the bus stops and thinks about how people get to and from the stop. So we're really excited about that project getting moving. So federally funded project, LTD is paying for the match on that project, and we're also supporting with staff time. You've heard about the Attain project before. This is for a micro transit service that will be in the Bethel area. It's been a long road, but we finally, on Monday morning at 5 in the morning, we got our grant agreement back from the feds. And so we're making progress, and I think we'll have that project kicked off pretty soon. It's the funding source for this is called the Attain program, and it's an innovative transportation and technology program. So there are some pretty technology heavy elements of this project that we will be looking for an external consultant to help us work through and do some development and integration work with our trip planning app, as well as our sort of some of our planning tools that we use to look at where people are riding transit, where transit might be needed, those sorts of things. So you're going to be hearing more about that soon. And then similarly, the long range mobility plan, which we've been talking about for a long time as well, very long procurement process, but we finally have an agreement signed with ODOT. ODOT and the Transportation Growth Management Program are funding a significant portion of that project. We have the agreement signed and we're just waiting for ODOT to invoice us now so that we can get the notice to proceed on that. And we do have a consultant already selected, Parametrics as well, the same consultant doing the corridor studies. So we're really excited to get that good work going, and you'll be hearing a lot about that project over the next year and a half or so. Just looking ahead to our May meeting. So I've got the service policy coming back again. We've pretty much wrapped up that work, and the SBC provided some really good input, I think 2 meetings ago. So we're planning on bringing you roughly the final product. It's a much more legible document. That was one of the big goals of this project, was to take something that's very technical and to make it more accessible for people, and something that, you know, just your average person can download from our website and get a better understanding of what that tool is for. So we'll talk about that. The bike share study, the transit bike share integration study, we'd like to get that in front of SPC in May as well. And then we probably have room for a little bit more content, maybe budget topic if that's of interest. So I'll work with Alma on that. So those are my updates, and happy to answer the questions. I think we're good on time. So.
Any questions from anyone or anyone online? Questions on Dave's staff updates?
Not a question, but just I'll add to that. I'm in the Oregon Transit Association Board of Directors, who we met this morning. And a couple things I will report, if I remember now. One is, I guess there is a ODOT's budget has been balanced using existing revenues, and there's some cuts in that to some things we care about, say for schools, back to transportation. But there's no cut to the STIP funding, as far as I'm aware of, the employee payroll tax. It's not increasing, but it's also not decreasing. So that's held constant. I think the other thing I would say is that the future of the employee payroll tax, or any payroll tax to fund transit in Oregon, is in doubt. And the Oregon Transit Association is having a retreat next month and kind of trying to see what's the future of transit funding in Oregon. It's an open question. That may be of strategic interest to LTD, perhaps.
Yeah, statewide funding, absolutely. And we can also bring Sam back, our government affairs manager, for more updates. He was at the meeting this morning as well. And yeah, that should be of interest to this committee. So yeah, happy to get that in front of us again.
Any other questions? All right. Let's go ahead and move on to our first agenda item, the fixed route bus stop ADA assessment draft, prioritization, methodology, and overview. We'll have Randy is going to be sharing with us today.
Yeah, good evening. I'm Randy Stoudinger, the project manager leading LTD's fixed route bus stop ADA assessment. If you remember, at the January Strategic Planning Committee, we introduced this project, reviewing its goals, the scope, and the schedule. But just as a reminder for those that may have missed it, we are evaluating approximately 1,000 fixed route bus stops that LTD operates to determine their ADA compliance, identify physical barriers and needed improvements. We're going to develop planning level cost estimates for improvements and create a prioritized implementation plan. Since that meeting in January, our consultant Kimley Horn has been in the field collecting data at every stop, and they're wrapping up that work this month. And so our next major step is prioritization. LTD staff and Kimley Horn have developed prioritization criteria to help determine which stops we should improve first. Tonight, we are seeking the committee's concurrence with the proposed framework that we'll show you. We're not asking for formal action. We're just simply looking for confirmation that the approach aligns with your expectations so that we can continue moving forward with this project. Once the data is finalized, we will apply the prioritization criteria to identify our high priority stops and develop an implementation plan by doing a few things. So one of the first things we'll do is coordinate with our local jurisdictions to align with their upcoming capital projects and understand what partnership opportunities we have with those projects. Next, we'll identify stops that can be improved using currently available funding that LTD has. And then last, we'll develop an implementation strategy that advances the accessibility of our stops as funding and partnership opportunities arise. Our goal with this is to be proactive. We want to strategically invest in the most impactful improvements and continue advancing accessibility of our stops for our riders over time. This summer, we will bring the final report and implementation plan to the Board of Directors for their awareness as well. We do have Kimley Horn, our consultant, a few folks online with us, and so I will turn it over to the Kimley Horn team to introduce themselves and walk us through the proposed prioritization criteria.
Thanks, Randy. I assume everyone can hear me and you can see the presentation on the screen.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, my name is Brian Schamberger. I'm the project manager for Kimley Horn, the consultant team. We're also have some team members in addition to Matt and Patrick on the screen, but we have some other partners on the project, Pivot Architecture, and also Citizen Engineers. So they're helping us with part of the overall project. And again, they've been involved recently with a lot of the field assessments. But again, want to let Patrick and Matt just introduce themselves real quickly, and then I'll get into the presentation.
Sure, I can go first. Good evening, everyone. Matt Poole with Kimley Horn, Deputy Project Manager for this project. My background in transportation engineering, but my focus throughout my career has really been on accessibility and ADA and pedestrian-related projects. So looking forward to sharing this information with you all tonight.
Good evening, everyone. Patrick Sweeney with Kimley Horn, I'm a senior planner in the Portland office. Happy to be with you this evening. Excited to work on this project and supporting Brian and Matt however I can to make sure this project goes well. Thanks.
Great. So we wanted to provide an opportunity for input from you tonight. But we first want to talk a little bit about our approach and the process that we are, applying to. Randy gave a great view of what we're doing. I mean, as you know, the purpose of the project is to look at your entire fixed route bus stop system for compliance with the accessibility standards and requirements. But we also understand as the goal of this is really to develop a long-range plan for implementation and improvements to bring these stops into compliance or provide compliance to the maximum extent feasible. So we want to, once the condition assessments are completed, we really want to rank those, prioritize those based on several factors, and we have a scoring criteria and process that we've established, and it's based on these. Let's just call them these three buckets here. So the first one, again, number one, is a rating based on the accessibility compliance. So we're evaluating based on the current standards for each of the bus stops, and then so we'll know the current condition at each of the locations, and then after that, we look at the priority or the scoring 2, which is what we're calling understanding the people and the place. And what that really means is who are the people where are the bus stops located relative to the people that they're serving, but also we look at the frequency of use, or has LTD had any kind of feedback or comments, or I don't always call them complaints, but there's some people say they have challenges associated with some of the existing bus stops. And then the third category is really a filter that we're not going to ask for a lot of input, but we want you to understand. It talks about while all things may be created equal, sometimes there are some challenges for the feasibility of implementation or remediation or fixing some of the existing barriers that may exist. There may also be some different constraints. So depending on if those are, if that exists, that may challenge the implementation, and therefore that would influence the priorities of any of these bus stops being improved. So what we wanted to do was kind of walk through these first two categories and give you an understanding. And then we're actually going to put you to work a little bit. So we want to get your input. So staff's kind of gone through and given their thoughts on this process, because there's going to be some weighting, these different factors within like the category number, but each of these 1 and 2, there's different levels of priority and different influences that will have impact the overall ranking and prioritization of each of the stops once they're evaluated. So, the first category, and again, the primary purpose of the project is to evaluate based on the accessibility and ADA compliance. So we have different levels. There's going to be a value within the accessibility, the ADA compliance category above. It ranks from going from high to low priority, and there is an up. I mean, obviously there will be, if it's fully compliant, and it's not a concern. It's not even a priority issue. That's actually nothing to do there, right? But when we look at a high priority issue, and again, if high priority means if it's a number 1, and it talks about, again, some of the, you mentioned some of the other funding that you received for some of that last mile thing, some of these other projects that could help improve connectivity, but a high priority bus stop where there's no real direct connection to any nearby sidewalk, or there's significant deterioration or cracking, or surface conditions are such that it really makes it not traversable or uneasy or difficult to use, or maybe it's just a stop sign or a bus stop sign along the side of the road, but it doesn't have the necessary features like a boarding and a lighting area. So you'll see as we go from high to low, there'll be these various elements will vary in terms of whether they exist or they don't exist, and also how much they are in how much they meet the standard or not. So high priority category number 2. Maybe in this case, it does have the boarding and lighting area, but it's a very small footprint. Maybe it's just an existing sidewalk that crosses the bus stop, the sign, or there's significant cross slope, or running slope that exceeds the 5% requirement within the boarding and lighting area. Maybe there's no clear space available to if there's amenities that are offered, whether it's at a bus stop or at a shelter, it doesn't have some of the required available clear spaces, or maybe there's even obstructions that may exist. An example, maybe like a fire hydrant or something else that doesn't allow someone to pass through. So we move kind of from high to medium, and again, there can be conditions like the pathways is too narrow, or there's insufficient clear space adjacent to some of the amenities there, or the sidewalk is very narrow as well. So it could be less than 36 inches wide, which is allowed for a very short period, but it does not need to be through the entire area. We then move to category 4, where maybe you have, again, a boarding and lighting area exists, but it's just not either wide enough or deep enough per the requirements. And then again, like each of these categories talks about, maybe there's a temporary obstruction, maybe there's some vegetation that's overgrown in the area that's probably a little easier, but again, this also translates into kind of the ease of implementation. Some of these things can be very low-hanging fruit. You can go out there through maintenance activities and fix these things, so it's not a significant risk to any of the riders who are using any of the system. As we move into like areas like low priority, there can be areas where sometimes the boarding and lighting areas are just barely below or just less, but again, it has a sufficient depth and dimensions, but it just doesn't technically meet. Same thing with some of the cross slopes, and maybe it just barely exceeds the 2% requirement, but it's also maybe less than 3%. So again, it's something that's not going to need to go out and fix tomorrow, but it's something you need to understand that it's technically out of compliance. And then maybe the width of the adjacent sidewalk connecting does exist, as opposed to high priority where it doesn't exist, but it exists, but it's at a narrow width. So this is the initial assessment. This is the condition assessment that we're doing. We'll evaluate all of these, and then they will be scored based on the current conditions, and they'll fall into any of these categories. So does this make sense? Again, based on one of the main focuses of the project, the rating based on ADA compliance. Does everyone understand kind of this process? Okay. We'll move on to the next category. Where we talk about understanding the people and the place. And again, so this really talks, again, as I mentioned earlier, about the people that the stops are serving. And there's different factors even with this, and we'll talk about this within the next few slides, but also the people that it serves and the complaints. So in this initial area here that we look at, we're gathering the demographic data based on the census data. So we have census tracts. Each of the stops are located within an existing census tract, and then we have this, whether it's population and demographic data that's shown on the screen. So we may have transit-dependent population. So that could be either zero vehicle households, or your senior citizens, or your younger population. You may also have a higher concentrations of persons with disabilities. So there are different needs there. Persons who have limited English proficiency, or low-income housing, or minority persons. Again, these are typically aligned with persons who rely on transit for transportation. So depending on the percentage, the higher percentage, the higher the score would then be assigned based on the demographic data available in the area. So the next category within the understanding people and places related to, we'd look at ridership. So think about it as it's a higher priority if it's a high ridership, but a stop location. Lower priority, lower ridership means have a lower value, so it'd have a lower score. We also look at, has LTD received any feedback? So we know right now we're about to, just wrapped up the rider survey, and we want to get feedback from that survey in terms of, have people experienced any kind of barriers being able to use the bus stop. And so based on that, if it received any kind of feedback like that, it would get a 1. If there were no complaints or any type of information received based on the survey, it gets a 0. It's almost a non-factor. This next category is, again, we'd like to understand, we'll do kind of a spatial analysis as to where is the stop relative to any essential services. So if people are using the stops to actually access any kind of government or education or medical facilities within a quarter mile within that walk shed, then it would get either a 1, and if it's not, it would get a 0. So therefore, we're accounting for its proximity to some of these major traffic generators or access to some of the services surrounding the stops. So, so those are the basic between the demographics and the people that they're serving, to ridership, feedback that the LTDs receive, but also as proximity. So that's the main 2 areas that we're wanting, again, tonight, to get your input on. How much should each of these influence the prioritization? So we're going to talk about that, but then I mentioned that last filter that we mentioned. The third thing is, once we get everything scored, we wanted to consider things like the feasibility of implementation, but also if there are any existing constraints. So what do we mean by feasibility? So how practical is it to implement something that, once what we identify as the remediation work that's going to require, that it will allow each stop to be more accessible, or to bring it into full compliance. Sometimes there may be some technical infeasibilities. There may be physical constraints that just won't allow us to do certain things. Also, there may not be available resources, or there may be challenges. So it's either kind of a yes or no thing. We'll have an understanding, again, what's the context surrounding the area, and then we just say, is this more of an easier or difficult project to implement? And then we look at some of the actual constraints. So there may be challenges at each of these locations that may limit or delay some of the repair work. For example, when we may have multiple jurisdictions that may be involved, there may be site conditions. We may have limited right-of-way that would require us to, whether it's purchase right-of-way or work through getting some type of easements. Those things take time. Whether, I mentioned some of the other things, like if it's just going out and clearing out some vegetation, or adding on a pad within the existing right-of-way and doing some light construction, or maybe relocating an existing trash receptacle, those things really don't cause any constraints or anything that would be any challenge. But major changes to the area where there's difficulty or implementation constraints, maybe there's permitting through maybe ODOT or any kind of environmental permitting that would be required. Probably not a lot of those, but if there are, that would then put each of these the stops into kind of two different buckets, and we're kind of using that to. This just makes sense to kind of influence the overall implementation, given some of these local conditions that may exist. So the next thing I mentioned earlier that LTD staff went through what percentage of these various factors they felt how we should weight each of these factors. So between the accessibility, that the physical assessment that we're doing, and then understanding the people in place, whether it's the demographics to the feedback they receive, or ridership, or where it's located, they went through and said, if I'm going to have my percentages of how do I break up my bucket, they said, well, and this was again multiple people, so it kind of came out to an average. So I don't think they didn't settle on 34%, but that's where the numbers ended up. About 34%. Based on staff input was based on ADA compliance. And then demographics was 20%. And then ridership was 25%. And then the remaining 20% are roughly would split between public outreach and the input. So understanding, existing complaints or challenges, and then where it's located relative to some of those essential services. So this is where they ended up, okay? And what we would like to do tonight is get your feedback. And so just before we do that, there was kind of an example. So what we applied, we initially did a pilot study, and we applied some of the prioritization methodology and the factors that we just discussed based on the scoring that we did, and using the sample, the initial pilot study that we had there in Eugene, we had a weighted rank, okay? And so this is where the bus stops that are located here, where it fell out, and this was the overall priority level, and then that then allowed us to then we also had we talked about budget resources and constraints and some of the physical site constraints and some of those things we talked about based on the feasibility and also implementation. And we noted some of those locations, either they had no constraints, or they may have resources constraints, or there may be some physical limitations on those sites. So then we applied that filter to each of these. So depending on, you may get a high priority location that may also have some constraints that's going to influence whether or not you're going to be able to move forward that first. But I think as we start to talk about this, it's going to be like, what are we going to be able to move forward with first? And then how does this also therefore rank? So we did a little bit of an exercise. So this is the outcome. We'd like to get your input on kind of what are your recommendations. And so we've got, hopefully everyone here, whether you're online or if you're in person, we're gonna do what we call a Mentimeter poll. So we're going to ask you to provide your same breakdown that's similar to what the staff did, to apply your percentages in terms of what do you think is the relative importance of each of these different factors. And so we've got a poll that you could use either if you have a computer, or if you're virtual, or if you have your phone, you can go to any of your browsers that you can get to you should have internet access. And we would like for you to then, we've given you 100 points. So basically you have 100%. And so we have these 5 different factors that we talked about. Again, accessibility, demographics, ridership, public outreach, and then the location, again, geolocation relative to essential services. And then if you go to either scan the QR code, or you can go to menti.com. And once you do that, and if you can go ahead and start doing that, please, you can enter the code 9119 then 2513, and it will take you to the pole, and you'll see what you see on the right side of the screen here. And what it will do, you can either put in 28 or 6, or you can increase or decrease the numbers. There's a scale on both sides of that, so you can adjust that if you want to keep it on.
Hey, Brian, could I interrupt you just for a second? I just want to, because we just presented a lot of information. I just want to make sure that if there's any questions or conversation we should have before we jump into this. Yeah, thank you.
No, I appreciate. Yeah, we can go back and talk about any of these categories if we need to. Yeah.
Thanks, David. Thanks, Brian. Okay, we have Rob has a question.
So thank you, Dave. Thank you, Alma. Thank you, presenters. Can you remind me how we're going to use this prioritization? Is it that some stops will get fixed and some won't? Or is it the order in which they get fixed and everything will eventually get fixed?
It's the order.
Okay.
So basically, and I don't know, Randy, if you want to jump in and share your thoughts, or I can either way.
Yeah, no, so we're not required to update every stop. We are required to have this assessment completed and know where we stand system-wide. And so what we're trying to do is start being proactive. We know we have deficiencies throughout the system. We know we can and need to do better. So we've got some funding identified now, and we're going to use that funding to address the high priority stops that come out from this assessment, and then we'll continue to figure out what kind of funding we need long term to continue addressing stops and continue working with the different cities as they have different projects that occur throughout the regions to address stops that are in those projects. So yeah, long term, absolutely, we want every stop to be accessible. I don't know how long it's going to take. It's, you know, again, up to, or depends on how much funding we can identify when and what work we can do with the different jurisdictions.
Thanks, Randy.
Thank you, Randy. That's helpful. So a follow-up question. Can you help translate the physical assessment into what it means for an actual rider? I mean, if it's high priority, does that mean that Scooter, for example, couldn't actually use that and it's impossible for getting on the bus? And a medium might mean it's a little bit annoying, but it's not a barrier. I mean, can you sort of translate the physical assessment into what it means for a rider?
Yeah. I mean, so if depending on the current conditions, like I said, so if it's a high priority issue, there may not be any kind of connection. So maybe there's just a stop along the side of the road that there's no sidewalk leading up to it. Not sure how anyone who's walking or rolling or getting anywhere, traveling to the stop would ever get there. Once they get there, if they're dropped off, how would they even leave the site depending on their needs? So that would be, it's a question of the stop location itself. Could the stop be relocated to a more accessible location? Or if the conditions may exist so that maybe there's connectivity, but there's barriers, and barriers come in different ways. Maybe there's significant, the paving or the sidewalk connections or the boarding and lighting may not even exist, but there's a sidewalk path, but there doesn't technically meet some of the requirements. So that depending on the current conditions, there may be, the conditions may influence a rider's ability to even use the stop. So it just varies depending on what's out there today. And so the purpose of this is to identify where we have significant high risk conditions that challenge anyone, whether you're able-bodied or you have a disability. So that's the purpose of this, understanding what's out there, and then the different levels of priority. Again, there may be stuff that's technically maybe out of compliance, but it's not something that's affecting anyone's use of the stop.
Thanks, Brian. We have another question from Peter.
Yeah, there's a really wide variety of LTD stops that don't have sidewalks. Some of them, like there is some sort of like shoulder area for pedestrians, or and some of them, like it's like you're either in the middle of the highway or you're on a dirt path. Does this accessibility compliance score, does it call everything without a sidewalk a 1, or is there some sort of nuance for like if there's a shoulder or somewhere that someone could be versus being in the dirt or the bushes?
Yeah, great question. I mean, if there is a bus stop sign that's adjacent to a road and there's no connectivity to it, yes, it would receive it would be considered a non-compliant condition, a high priority area, because it from an accessibility standpoint, it's not usable, or it creates significant challenges or it has some people then again using a shoulder as your path, the accessible route, that is not, it's not an accessible route.
I think it might be helpful too to think about it in terms of, we do have those situations where we have a pole located on a shoulder or, you know, grassy strip or something. That would receive a high priority, but then there's also the filtering aspect. And so I think that gives us the opportunity to, you know, while it scores high priority from the compliance side of things, then the filter helps us figure out, is that something that we can address now, or is that some, and right now I'm thinking in my mind of actually McVeigh Highway. City of Springfield is redesigning McVeigh Highway. We're probably not, and all those stops along McVeigh are that exact situation. They're a pole in the ditch. And so we're probably not gonna go do a project to address that because we know there's this bigger project coming along the line. So that the filter helps us sort of like wade through that.
I appreciate everybody bringing up those things, especially in relation to me. I don't know if you can tell, I'm a manual wheelchair user here. And I have encountered at least a couple of the stops that are just a pole in the grass next to a ditch, not even a shoulder. One specific stop when I first moved out here in Veneta, and I ended up relocating because I couldn't get the bus often enough. There was no sidewalk, there was no shoulder, there was no path. It was grass, and often I couldn't get my wheelchair up onto the bus. So also just, I don't know, ADA accessibility and disability in general, it's great that there's guidelines and stuff, but there's also nuance. Because then my situation regarding that completely negates like how often that stop is used now, because I flat out couldn't use it. So I moved. If I didn't have the ability to move, I still wouldn't use that stop. I just wouldn't get anything with my life done. But I'm one person. So I don't know how much weight that would be on, you know, how popular the stop is and that sort of thing. And I'm not trying to like throw a whole bunch of problems in here. I'm just trying to bring up stuff that comes to mind with some of these things, especially like the demographic factors. I think that's a great thing to include, but also anybody can become disabled at any time.
Right.
Overnight, unfortunately. Right. It's the only minority anybody can join.
It's the only minority that does not discriminate.
Right, yeah, it's a jerk like that. And I did have a question, I'm guessing the answer. When you do the assessment of a stop, do you only take into account ADA guidelines? Or is there some nuance if a particular stop just clearly isn't perfectly accessible, but it's not just because of a specific guideline? I mean, the universe is weird, stuff happens, people are involved, you know, not everything fits exactly in a set of rules that's yes or no.
Yeah, when we're definitely documenting current conditions and what exists out there, but we also, as we're starting to look through, you know, we look at this outside just the footprint of where the bus stop is. It's the adjacent surroundings. It's what's happening from whether it's business owners and how they treat the right of way, but also what can we do to make it accessible? And again, I'll talk about it to the maximum extent feasible. Sometimes you can't achieve full compliance.
Right.
So you think about, you know, well, that's right, we can't meet this grade because of, you know, the terrain or something else, but we can do some of the things that may make it better, or we don't just look at it specifically. It's either it's either all in or all, I mean, that's not the purpose of this. Again, we do try to come up with, first, yes, we are going to be looking at it based on the current standards and guidelines, but we try to be as practical as possible in the solutions that we provide and identify just to improve access.
Just to touch base on that, sometimes that's as simple as looking at an alternative location down the road that's more accessible.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Tiffany?
And real quick, and your point was your early point of, that the accessibility of the location and just the existing conditions does influence, obviously someone that may have a disability, but I think it has a similar impact on, you talk about ridership and its influence. It probably influences everyone potentially, or some people, a lot of people in the area, because they just, they just have challenges getting to those locations. And once they get there, how do they get to and from where they want to go?
Tiffany?
Thank you. Brian, I had a question. Forgive my kind of ignorance here, but I'm trying to understand the nexus between the specific improvements that are needed and how they impact certain populations. So if I'm thinking about, just because if I'm trying to prioritize, I would go right to persons with ADA needs if you're talking about the improvements needing to be ADA compliance. I'm having a hard time understanding like what specifically with a youth population, for example, what improvements or what deficiencies exist within some of these stops that are specific to some of these populations? What is different about the distance to the curb or something with a minority population that would have it be different than someone with an ADA need? Does that make sense? I know that's kind of confusing, but I'm just trying to understand the nexus of why we're looking at all of these different demographics and we're scrubbing that out for essentially what is kind of accessibility issues. It's the ADA in particular.
I think
That's a weird question. No.
if I can jump in, it's a good question. It's a good question. It kind of makes me think of the point that Scooter just brought up, that you moved because of a non-compliance. Right? So,
Yeah.
I mean, the reality is that people do move around in cities and they may move for a variety of reasons to meet their needs. So I don't think you can look at it just as a point in time necessarily that particular population may or may not need an ADA compliance stop, but maybe opening up or making a stop compliant in an area could allow somebody who has an ability, disability could move into that area to access the stop. I think typically you see this as these combination of factors are often called like transportation disadvantaged populations as a matrix or combination. And so it's sort of industry practice, I think, to use this sort of tool.
But so maybe let me ask a different question then. What kind of accommodation would be different for someone with a low income household? Can you give me an example maybe?
I mean, it gets back to also the point Brian was making around these improvements benefit everybody.
Yeah.
And so this sort of takes an equity lens and prioritizes populations who are more transit dependent so that they receive, the improvements earlier on, I guess.
We do have one person online, and maybe I would jump in on something a little bit. So I think we think about intersectionality with a lot of the populations. So we might have, and again, this is just giving an example, but you might have a family that might not disclose that they are limited English proficiency, but they have children that are helping be their communicator in the home. So we need, again, we're thinking about that minority family with with younger children, that they are pushing a stroller and they have their little child being their communicator for them. They're not going to probably, depending on the situation, disclose that they don't speak, their parents don't speak English.
Right.
So I just think about some of those, like there's all this intersectionality between these pieces. So there's a bigger, it's almost like this is our paint source, and we're painting a picture for what our community looks like, and not to turn it into like a beautiful picture with that, but that we think about intersectionality. So many of these things there's numerous challenges that marginalized communities historically face. So we're trying to take all those pieces into consideration.
Well, and if, I mean, given that anyone can become disabled at any
Yeah,
time,
it's a good-
that, I think that maybe is a big part of it too, that if you're transit dependent, yeah.
Okay, Patrick lowered his hand, but Claire raised their hand. Go ahead, Claire.
Yeah, so, yeah, Alma, you were kind of getting at what I was gonna say. I think there's also, I mean, I don't know where we get the data point to have the demographic on there are X number of persons with ADA needs within this census tract, right? So that's self-reported, I'm assuming, on these surveys. And I could imagine there are a lot of people who don't consider themselves to have a disability, but they may actually have some kind of physical impairment that makes it more challenging for them to get to a bus stop than somebody else. And so I see the overlay in a zero vehicle household, in a senior population, even in a youth population, and these other populations with someone who has a disability. And as Scooter was saying, there's a lot of nuance in there. The nuance of how disability shows up is also part of it. And so I think these additional demographic factors help ensure that we are kind of casting the net more widely than we might otherwise if we didn't include them in the considerations.
Tiffany, I want to go back to your question real quick. You asked how the improvements may differ based on this information, and they don't. We have standards that we use, whether we're installing a shelter or just a simple pole in the ground or with a semi seat. The standards, you know, we use the same standard when we're installing new stops. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yes, thank you.
Rob, did you have?
Well, I'm following up on what Tiffany said. I'm trying to figure this out in my head. You know, if we had unlimited resources, we'd seen that we'd fix all the high priority, the physically high priority stops that aren't working, the ones that are causing somebody like Scooter, who's, she can't even use it, she moves away. The issue is that, you know, if there's a stop and nobody's using it anyways, why put a lot of resources into fixing it if it doesn't benefit anyone? And so this factor here about understanding people in places is trying to get at who it might actually benefit. And I guess I agree with you, being transportation disadvantaged really means you don't drive. You tend to use the bus, okay, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're gonna have a problem with a sign that's stuck in the gravel. You're a 16-year-old kid and you just walk to it, it's fine.
Right.
Whereas if you use a wheelchair, maybe it doesn't work for you at all. And so this understanding people in place is not quite getting at, I think, sort of the population we're trying to program for. We want to invest resources where it's actually gonna make a difference in real people's lives. Not just be sort of like a convenience or a nice thing to have, but a make or break whether they have access to transit or not. Should be our highest priorities.
You can't really use ridership if, to Scooter's example, people aren't riding because there's no accessibility.
Right,
So
right.
then you
It's a
can't
chicken,
use
yeah.
riders, right? And then why would you take resources, valuable resources, and invest them and not consider the extra benefit or the mutual benefit to transit dependent populations, right? I mean, so it makes sense to me.
Yeah, Patrick online.
Yes, this is a fantastic conversation. I just, you know, having worked on transit corridors and transit plans for a lot of my career, I think one way to think about it is when comparing the whole network and looking at these routes. So Lane Transit already designs their routes where they go to target transit dependent populations because that's what builds ridership. So you're already going to those places, a lot of them, not every single one, but a lot of them. And then imagine a whole entire corridor and a whole series of stops, you know, which ones are serving the people that use it the best? Maybe some of them, like someone brought up a bunch of like high school kids using a bus stop. Thinking about my son's in high school and I know when he's with his buddies, they're just a gang of people and they move on, move off. It's like not a big deal, but you know, do they have enough room? Okay, yeah, that works great. However, if there's something else where someone is using a device and they're having trouble navigating to get to the bus stop, either on a sidewalk, around the shelter, or to the sign, or even from a sidewalk, which then gets beyond Lane Transit District. Then it's Lane Transit District working in coordination with City of Springfield, City of Eugene, ODOT, someone else. So these geographic factors, and then it gets a little more complicated because then you got to figure out, okay, where is the problem? Is it at the bus stop or is it connecting to the bus stop?
Mm-hmm.
So these priorities with the populations and on the routes, it can get to who's using it. Also, senior populations is another major factor coming on, because as the population of Oregon continues to age, the silver tsunami that we've all heard about, that is coming. And so I guess my point is, there's these factors about the bus stop, but then there's factors just beyond the bus stop that also get identified with this study, which will help with the prioritization. I hope that helped.
Thank you,
I
Patrick.
just want to make sure we're staying on time. And I hear what everyone's saying. And when we go through this, what we're really looking for is a way to rank these, right? And we know we're going to have to look at these after the ranking is all done and make some decisions as well. That one doesn't actually really make sense to improve right now for reason X, Y, and Z that people have already brought up in this meeting. But Brian, I'm wondering, can we scoot back to the exercise real quick?
Thank you, Randy. We have 17 minutes for this topic.
Go to the next one. So go back one slide. So just to hit on this again, LTD staff recommendation, what we think should have the largest priority in determining or largest influence in determining what priority a stop takes in terms of fixing it or making it more accessible is the actual accessibility it currently has. So, if a stop's not accessible, that should be the highest ranking factor of what LTD staff thinks. And then, it goes down the line of ridership would rank underneath that versus demographics and public outreach and geolocation. So what we're looking for in this next activity is for feedback from this committee to see if you are in agreement with what staff has recommended for which factor should have the largest influence over which stop has the highest priority to repair or improve first.
So we would like to take maybe the next, however, be 5 minutes, if we can get you to go to the site and then provide your individual responses. So once everyone is able, if you can let me know if you're able to get to the site, and then what we'd like to do is then we'll kind of see what the live results are. We would like to have this with each of you to individually do that, and then we'll see as the committee what were you able to come up with. So is everyone able to do it? Andrew, you have a question?
Already voted, so maybe just if you haven't done it, just sort of raise your hand that you need to.
I'm working on it.
We do have a question from Commissioner Buck online.
No, I was just going to compliment you guys on this this tool, the Mentimeter. Super easy to use, really intuitive, and I think it gets everybody's input really quickly. So I was just going to kind of give you guys some compliments there on this little tool. So thank you.
Thank you. All right, we're having folks put that through, and
I think what threw me off is that demographics includes all of it, and I almost wish I could split those out. That was what I was like, that was in my head, but I'm like, I don't look at them equally when it comes to accessibility on certain other things. So anyway.
Yeah.
Sorry, I made that.
Yet that's the industry standard about what transportation disadvantage.
Outreach one is throwing me off because I remember seeing.
Yes.
Sorry, which one?
That's the information we have.
Because I think there was like one,
My whole 17-year-old.
I found it on
I know.
Facebook
Well,
and it was very short.
Well, there's the survey, but it's also across all that we have over time. So we
Okay.
track all that stuff.
Says
Okay.
everyone, just want to be mindful about, well, not only time, but just getting information in. And also acknowledge, that's why folks are at this table, because you want to be able to look at the issues and the challenges from many different lenses and many different angles. So, and also I'm glad that we feel safe to ask questions so that we can get clarity. And also, so yeah, I just want to acknowledge that. It's appreciation for folks sharing.
Has everyone already responded?
I like that it didn't make me do math.
We're still working on it here, Brian.
We did this exercise on paper first, but the consultant suggested meant to me.
How's everyone online? Has everyone online gotten a chance to,
Paul, the question?
go ahead, Paul.
No, I was just looking for a reaction button to say yes.
I know, we had to figure out the thumbs up. Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, I did mine also.
How about in the room? It looks like everybody put their phones down, so I assume that if your phone is down, you've been able to, okay, it looks like we are all followed the assignment here, Brian.
All right, so
Yeah.
we'll go back to this. So based on, here's the responses. And so if you look at this a little bit, is that 100%? I think it is 100%. It's not 100%.
No, what's going on? See, it did make us. The math
I was wondering, my math was off.
There has to be some rounding happening somewhere.
Not a rounding.
Hey.
I think you did have to do your math.
I think
Because you had to make it
I
out
know.
of that.
I think so.
So you should see in your poll how many points you have remaining if you did not use them all.
It just gave more points to ridership, doesn't it?
We have to 101.
Yeah, I think ridership was a lot lower than we got.
Yeah, I'll keep refreshing this, but it should automatically update. So maybe we look at the trend here that we generally see that accessibility is at the higher end. But how far off are we?
No, that is it.
It has like one extra point somewhere.
Make me add.
It's a rounding issue. So let's just. So I mean, one of the things that there are generally a little more focus on ADA compliance, whereas the staff had it 25 and y'all had it 20, but the remaining ones are fairly similar, just a little more higher influence on the accessibility of current conditions. Curious if based on is there anything that was there any reason why you had it a certain way? Do you think? I mean, let's talk about that. Why did we, if individually or as a group, do we think this should be higher than relative to the remainder? Because if you look at it, we're kind of in pretty good alignment. It's not very far off.
I'm always going to be saying more on public outreach because, I mean, that's direct feedback from people that are directly affected by it. So it's literally saying, I'm having an issue with this bus stop because X, Y, Z. And I just feel like that's pretty impactful right there.
I agree. I ranked it higher also.
I'm slightly biased on it, but I'll admit it.
I changed that ranking to much higher.
I concur with them. And you have, Andrew had, Councilor Buck had his hand up and then Bill.
Yeah, thank you. Just to respond, I ranked accessibility in the physical assessment the highest. Just not that any of the other ones are important. I mean, they're all important. I think all of these matter. For me, I just kind of took it from a standpoint of, taking a look at it. Can people access the stop? Does it make sense? Is it safe? All of those things, and being able to take a look at it. Obviously, hearing the public outreach and then of course the demographics and ridership are important. But being able to go out and actually have that physical assessment. What are we seeing? What are the conditions? And just from a common sense standpoint, is it safe? I think there's the ADA component that's super important. But even outside the ADA component, when we've got places where there's a pole on the ground on the side, on the shoulder of the road, it's like, is that really a safe place for people to be waiting and getting on and off the bus? And some of those stops, you know, I think that could be questionable. And so that's why I said physical assessment, going out and taking a look and seeing, okay, what have we got here? And does this make sense? If I was catching the bus here, or if I was getting off on the bus here, what does that look like? That's where I came from on it, and that's why I weighted physical accessibility assessment the highest.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bill, and then Peter. And we have about 3.5 minutes. Just.
I'll be brief. I saw public outreach a little different. It's not the most significant factor, but having worked with surveys and public processes, hence I don't know enough about how the process worked or who responded. Public input can distort things sometimes. So, you know, who responded? What stops were they at? Are there other stops that nobody commented at that are higher needs? So I was a little skeptical of that.
Mm-hmm.
That's all.
Fair. Peter?
Yeah, I was a little different than the rest of SBC, it seems, in voting ridership pretty high, just because we have some bus stops that get 100+ buses per day, and some bus stops that get 3 buses per day. And I think it's important for us to commit our resources to the stops that most of our community members are using. As well as if we vote the accessibility physical assessment too high, then I think it will be entirely investing in the rural routes, which may not be the best thing for the entire community.
Good point.
Yeah.
We do have a little more time. I don't want to be too draconian about it, but just trying to be a little thoughtful about folks' time. So, all right.
Well, we did have some other questions. I mean, I think you've talked a little bit. I mean, because we had some thoughts of, like, if you had additional points, where would you make those investments? Or if you were you had to remove 20 points, where would you change those? I mean, I think it's just, it looks to some of this, but any comment on that?
I'll just comment that I know you all probably built it into your process when you were looking at, like, the feasibility in general, but it seems like if there were things that were much more attainable to fix or to make improvements with, like, you could do 6 things that are maybe in the low priority versus 1 in the high based on the cost, or just something else like that. Just some way to see that, because I think sometimes, like, the overall impact of something, just because something's on the high priority, maybe, if you can only do one thing, because we know we don't have unlimited resources. So in thinking about how you might want to allocate resources, and there was a choice between doing 6 things that might have a really big impact versus 1 thing that's just very out of compliant kind of thing, I guess that's what I would be curious about if it was me making the decision.
Yeah, real quick, and I think that this is just an understanding of this is a start. Keep in mind that we need to understand current conditions, who it's serving, where, influences that we're trying to consider. But yes, I mean, it needs to be practical. It needs to be flexible as we're having conversations with local communities, what's going on in their areas, other projects, and how can we leverage other resources. And so that's where this plan and what the steps moving forward needs to take all of these things into consideration. But yes, there will be low-hanging fruit that you can go out there and kill 10, do 10 things versus the really difficult. That's why we also had that filter too. And they mentioned that some things that are really difficult and challenging, that may be pushed down the road just a little bit, and it still may be high priority. It doesn't mean we're going to have to be forced to do something overnight. And so, but again, this is, once the information is available, then it's about how do you make some logical sense and good business decision in terms of how do you utilize your resources to have the most impact on the maximum number of people.
Brian, can you go back to the questions that you had, just so that, the team can see what if we had 20 more points where we'd add them, that was, I think, the thing that was asked. Just want to make sure folks got a chance to think about that a little bit.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, if you had more points, what bucket would you put those in? Same thing, if you had to take some away, where would you remove them from?
Thanks, Brian. Bill, go ahead.
If I had more points, I would add them to ridership.
Okay.
It's a little low at 25%, and I think Peter made a great point a few minutes ago about I might take some points away from accessibility, given though that's the main thrust of this.
I mean, I kind of wonder about getting to what you're talking about with population density wasn't anywhere in this. And so if you're looking at ridership, then but a stop is totally not accessible. We know there's a portion of the population that could be using it that isn't. But if you had population density in with your demographics somehow, that seems like that could get at that. That's like throwing a real wrench in there, but I'm just, puzzling over that piece. I think
maybe like number of people in these demographics instead of percentage of people in the demographics, just as a way maybe.
Yeah.
One of I think Bill had mentioned understanding the difference, the public outreach versus, so it's like almost like communication out versus receiving communication in. And again, if I had more points, I know I have a bias about this, but making sure folks know about the changes that are made. So how do we communicate that, get that information out? I don't know if that's part of this or just the marketing for LTD, but I'd like more points for folks to know, like, we made these changes, now this is available. Because I think that also impacts, like, I think about, it's easy for us to say, there's not a lot of ridership in our rural areas, but because it's, again, the chicken egg situation that we have, so. Rob.
To Peter's point, am I correct that you'll adopt a methodology, you'll go through it, you'll get some preliminary results, we'll see that. If it turns out, Peter, that, all the high priority ones are rural stops, then we'll kind of say, well, that's not what we meant. But if it doesn't turn out that way, we'll get some feedback. Is that correct? That we'll get to see the preliminary results.
So far, we've only done a pilot study with this data, and that only had like 20 stops, right? But once we get all of the data incorporated, we're gonna apply this methodology and kind of see how the results work. And so what we're looking for is a spread as well. We don't want every stop to be high priority. We don't want every stop to be low priority. We want that spread amongst the stops. But then we're also gonna, we have folks from different departments on this project team, from planning to facilities and so on and so forth, that can help us distinguish, does it make sense to invest in this stop, or should we, put this on the back burner until later because we would see more public need at these other stops, right? And so that's part of the kind of the final report that we'll be working on more towards this summer. And with that report, we'll be bringing that to the board of directors to review. And then we will start moving forward with some construction and design efforts to start addressing what's been determined to be the high priority stops.
I think at the top of the subject today, I said the goal is to see if this approach that has been presented from the lens of staff aligns with SPC's expectations. So I guess that's kind of the big question right now. Does where we have all, per our recommendation, we're a few points off and ridership was the highest spread here. How does the committee feel in terms of the alignment with expectations of SPC and staff? Tiffany?
I would want to know, how did they come up with the numbers? Did they do the same exercise we did?
We actually did.
I mean, that's fair. I just was thinking, because your numbers they're not exact, right? And so I was just kind of curious.
Randy pulled a group of staff and this is the averages.
Okay.
So, I mean, we're pretty close. I think the key to remember here is, like, I mean, we could spend a lot of time kind of tweaking these little dials, and we might not see much change in the results ultimately. And so,
I am surprised how overall it's relatively close.
Yeah, I mean, I think it makes sense if you sort of think about it, like what the different factors that go into it. So I feel pretty good about what I see here, and I don't have any concerns. this is to implement these improvements over time, this is going to take years, maybe decades. It's not something that will happen overnight. And as we develop the projects, likely what will happen, there will be a package of locations that are improved annually. And that package, we have opportunities to tweak things as we develop those packages. And so there could be opportunities as we're developing the construction packages each year that we bring those for review to this committee. Like here's the proposal for this year. What's your feedback on that? But yeah, I'm pretty comfortable with this. I think we had a really good discussion and a lot of really good questions from the group.
I do want to be mindful of time. We have a couple of 2 minutes. We have Bill and then we have Patrick.
Yes, Rob made a good point too, restating that it's almost like a model, and in some modeling exercises, we calibrate the model. I'm not sure if Randy really spoke to that or not. She may have, but I think that was the point Rob was making. Have this methodology, but do the results make sense? Do they pass the LAF test? So it sounds like you're going to look at some of the results and see if they look reasonable. I think that was a good point that Rob made. Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to leave a final thought of what I see here in the numbers. And there's a relationship between demographics and ridership. And I'm coming at this with a bias, having worked on transit systems and knowing where corridors and what goes into a route selection process. So I look at the numbers and I'm seeing 38% towards accessibility and almost 40% towards corridors, like the bus lines. So I don't look at demographics and ridership separately. I kind of push them together because that's where corridors are targeted anyway. So to me, this feels like a really good split.
Thank you for that last word, Patrick.
Yeah.
Appreciate it very much. All right. Just looking to make sure I did not exclude anyone. Thank you, Randy, for bringing all these pieces together as well. Very, very appreciative. All right, we're going to move on to Mark. And thank you, team, for joining us today. We're going to go ahead and move on to our coordinated plan progress update. Thanks, Patrick and Brian, for joining us, and Randy. Sorry I didn't close that out very well.
Thank you.
Trying really hard to stick to time, folks. So multitasking. I usually have someone else helping me with that. So.
Let me introduce myself. My name is Daniel Collister. I'm a senior planner at the Lane Council of Governments, and LCOG is working with LTD to update the coordinated plan. And so that's why I'm here tonight presenting with Carrie, and I'll let Carrie introduce herself.
Yes, good evening, everyone. My name is Carrie Asklar. I'm a planner with LTD working with LCOG on this project. Just want to start off with some good news. We're not going to make you do math. Just excellent.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
Would you like me to, how much, would you like some time at the end for time for questions? You want me to, like 10 minutes?
Yeah, that sounds good. Yeah. So no math, but we are really happy to be on the heels of the fixed route ADA assessment project. We are kind of pivoting a little bit, but we're still talking about vulnerable groups such as older adults and people with disabilities. So the coordinated plan addresses the needs of those folks, but in a different way. So this plan may be familiar to you. We presented to this committee last fall, and we're just back to provide an update on how the plan is going and kind of look at the future of what we'll be doing with this plan and when we will be back in front of this committee next. So next slide, please. Everything that we do at LTD, we want to make sure it aligns with our mission, vision, and values. So in a nutshell, the coordinated plan is our effort to look closely at how our transit services and our partners' transit services can better align with the coordinated care organizations to serve older adults and people with disabilities. So just want to mention this plan aligns with our mission, vision, and values. Next slide. So I gave a little bit of a teaser, but diving into what the coordinated plan is. It is a plan that every transit agency is required to have. We've had a coordinated plan since the 2000s, as you probably may remember from a previous presentation. So this plan that we're updating now is an update to the latest version from 2019. All this to say is that we're building off of a good foundation. We are, as part of this plan, we're updating the 2019 plan, but we're also taking a look at what those transportation services that we have currently for people with disabilities and older adults. We're looking at these two populations by inventorying our services today, what's out on the road, looking at the needs of our stakeholders. I mentioned we're looking at these two specific groups, but we're also not we're not turning away anyone else who says that I have a need, because as we have talked about with that really robust conversations, there can be overarching needs that folks come to us that we can fix it for this population, then that can unlock a lot of transportation access to other folks. So we're also looking at the gaps and the overlaps in our coverage. We're also developing priorities and strategies to guide our investments that we're talking about through this plan. We also have a STIF advisory committee. STIF stands for Statewide Transportation Improvement Fund. So that is a source of funds that LTD can tap into. And that committee is sort of our advisory committee, our guiding star that we like to bounce ideas off of. So just wanted to mention that we have that committee there. I also want to take a moment to dig into what that guiding investments piece is. If you want to go back one slide, sorry. And just make sure that we have a bigger picture of how of this plan and how this plan fits in with some of these other moving pieces. So I know this is the Strategic Planning Committee, but just really quickly, this plan guides LT's decisions about how we allocate our resources to serve seniors and people with disabilities. So for example, one project is our RideSource ADA paratransit. That project we use resources to fund the operations of that project, but we also use funds to purchase buses to provide that service. So some of those costs are just ongoing, but some of them are one-time capital costs. And these one-time capital costs, we bundle them into our CIP to look at how we can fund them in that way. Most of the projects within the coordinated plan are these operational or ongoing costs. So they're not really the shiny new ribbon cutting projects, but they're still really important, again, to serve folks who have disabilities or who are older adults. So just listing out community needs and the projects within the coordinated plan to address those needs helps us go after funding in the future to make sure that those projects come alive and continue and just continue on. One more point I want to make on this slide is that many of these projects, but not all of them, are funded by that statewide transportation improvement fund. A portion of that STIF fund is formula funding, which means it just comes directly to LTD, which is great. And we have that advisory committee at LTD to help us make some of those funding decisions when we get that funding. Some of it, though, is discretionary, which means we have to apply for it. And when we apply for STIF funds or any kind of funds, it's really helpful to have a coordinated plan such as this one to point to and say, these are the projects that we want to fund. This is what we heard from our community members. These are the needs. And so just making sure that all of that aligns and is bundled into this coordinated plan, as well as mentioning why LTD cares about this, this plan really helps us go after that future funding. So that's a really long-winded way to say having this plan helps LTD develop priorities and helps us guide our investments, which guides our investments and is tied to how we formulate our budget. So moving along, we are a little more than halfway through our planning timeline. We're really focusing now on assessing those community needs that we've been hearing from through our engagement, as well as looking at the coordination practices and projects and just seeing what projects do we have now, what do we need to be tweaked. So that's kind of the phase of the project that we're in. We will be back in front of this committee sometime soon, later this spring, with a draft plan for you all, as well as we'll be back to seek your recommendation for the LTD board to adopt this plan later this summer. So that's where we are with the project. And now I'm going to hand it off to Dan.
Next slide, please. This is a map of Lane County showing the population distribution across the county. Of course, it's a big county, and there is a concentration of population there towards the middle, but a big percentage of the population of Lane County live outside of Eugene and Springfield. And as a public transportation service provider that relies on public funds and has limited resources, how you provide services to people where population is less dense, it can be challenging. It sometimes requires some creative thinking and a careful understanding and thorough knowledge of the services that exist and what the needs are, and coordinating those services as best you can to be most efficient with your investment dollars. And that's really what this plan is all about, especially considering, can we go to the next slide, please? As Carrie mentioned, a focus of this plan are older adults and people with disabilities. And this and the next slide after it look really similar. They're the population distribution for older adults and people with disabilities in Lane County. And you can see, if you focus just on Eugene Springfield, you're missing a lot of people. And there's some challenges that come with that and providing those services. Can we go to the next slide, please? And the next one. So we've inventoried the services that exist across the county, and we've grouped them into these 4 different categories. Fixed route bus services, that's the numbered LTD routes, but it's also link lane service between Eugene and Florence. It's also the Diamond Express and the Rhodey Express. We have demand response services. So these are on demand, like Right Source Paratransit, Cottage Grove Connector, and rural shuttles fit in that category. Next, we have other services in Lane County. So that, of course, are private taxi companies. There are also TNCs like Uber and Lyft. And we also include non-emergent medical transportation in that group as well. And finally, services that connect to Lane County. So that's where you're going to find Amtrak or the Point Cascades, that's the intercity bus connecting Eugene to Portland, and the new 99 Vine service would fit in that category. Next slide, please. So here we see same map of Lane County. We've identified where fixed route and demand response services currently exist. And it's obviously there's enormous gaps where there's not apparent service, but still this is commendable considering the service or the resources that are available to LTD, and that's such a large area to serve. When you compare that with the population density, the population distribution map we showed you earlier, there's a lot of people that don't have access to services. And even the people who may technically live within these areas, having a bus that passes a quarter mile from your house might not be the service that you need. You might have different needs that bus maybe doesn't quite meet for various reasons. So next slide, please. Of course, as older adults and people with disabilities are a focus of this plan, Ride Source service is going to play a key part. And so here we show a little bit about some information about that service. It is an excellent service. It provides mobility options to people who don't have a lot of choices, especially people, older adults, people with disabilities, helps them get to appointments where they don't have other options. It's well utilized, over 1,000 trips a day. However, it is geographically limited. You can see the service area there is limited pretty much to Eugene Springfield area. Next slide, please. As we were or are developing this plan, we've done a lot of engagement and outreach with the public and stakeholders to try to get a lot of input. We want to know what the needs are. We developed a survey. We distributed that pretty broadly, but specifically targeting communities of older adults and people with disabilities, but not limiting ourselves to those groups. We did receive a lot of input that's been really helpful. We went to tabling events, been presenting to a lot of public committees, There's a few of you here who've heard me a number of times. I'm looking at Rob and Bill and some others. But and this data has been really helpful in identifying the needs, and we've been augmenting and supplementing that with existing data sets that exist, like the Alice report from United Way. LTD's Origin Destination Survey from 2023 is a rich data set that has a lot of information that's really helpful. There was a Ride Source survey from 2024, Link Lane Transit Development Plan, and a couple others. All that is to say, we've been identifying and analyzing all of the needs that we've been hearing and condensing them. We'll go to the next slide, please. We've put them into these 6 groups that we've identified for needs. So a lot of the input that we got was regarding areas that aren't being served or aren't being served well. There's a lack of availability, or the service is there, but it's not frequent, or I can't access it for whatever reason. A need for non-traditional services. Affordability was a big concern that we heard. A lot of need for training and education on what services actually are available or how to use the service. A lot of people just didn't know. A lot of comments about safety and security, or just accommodations that are beyond what LTD provides currently. So all these needs serve to populate a project list, which is part of this plan. Next slide, please. And part of that process is establishing the priorities for the investments as the funding to implement those projects becomes. We have vetted these priority framework, these 3 priorities through the STIF committee, who, as Carrie mentioned, is serving as the steering committee for the plan development. These are actually very similar to LTD's STIF priorities. They are priority number 1, maintain sustainable service levels of viable operations, which essentially means keeping existing services running well. Priority 2, responding to growth within existing services, which is improving or expanding what you have. And the 3rd priority, responding to emerging community needs. That would be creating new services. Next slide, please.
Great. So what this slide shows you are the projects from our 2019 plan. We don't have time to get into all of them, but I do just want to mention that all of them but one are still active today. So it just wanted to show this to say there's been a lot of good work in the past few years that LTD has done to meet the needs of seniors and folks with disabilities. I do want to flesh out 2 of these projects as an example of how we are hearing the need from the community members, what we're doing or what practice that we're implementing to meet that need, and then what that project looks like as we implement it. So next slide, please.
Which is the one that's no longer?
The Pearl Buck transportation. The first project I want to mention is the replacement or expansion of vehicles. In the past, LTD identified a need to maintain and improve transportation services throughout the county, as well as to manage those costs. So there are a lot of different services, a lot of different needs, but that can be really confusing and expensive. To address this, we started consolidating our vehicle purchases. We also started cost sharing agreements and began ride sharing. LTD also created some interagency partnerships, so can't do this without our really great partners. And we also started to right size the vehicle type to match that service. So not sending a 60-foot long bus out to meet the needs of maybe like 2 people that are going to the doctor. These practices are not isolated. These are practices that we're applying to many other of the projects within the plan that I shared on the previous screen. So just wanted to mention that we're trying to be efficient with how we address all of these needs. This translated to a project where LTD started purchasing accessible vehicles and leasing them out to our transportation providers to operate, so that we really efficiently manage and maintain our vehicle fleet while providing that service through Ride Source, through the Roadie Express, the Diamond Express, and many other shuttles that we have in circulation. Next slide. The second project I just want to dive into for a moment is providing medical and non-medical transportation. This project was created to meet the need of providing some unconventional services while managing those costs. So really providing service to what are specific, somewhat specific, but really commonly taken trips. So just trying to be efficient with our service. And we started the coordination practice of hosting a one-call center with multiple transportation providers all under one house. Also practicing, again, ride sharing with these different transportation trips, and personally evaluating the needs and capabilities of some of our riders, while also, again, coordinating with our really valuable partners. So what this looked like as it came to fruition is the RideSource One Call Center, where we coordinate about 20,000 trips a month based on OHP eligibility. These trips can range from well-check appointments to life-sustaining care, and can range from local trips within our region or outside of the county, maybe up to Portland to OHSU, or maybe out-of-state trips, which sometimes that's what's needed for folks. So I know these were just 2 projects out of 16 or 17, but these 2 projects really just scrape the surface of the type of projects and work that LTD has been putting into motion as a result of the coordinated plan. Again, we're just using this planning process to engage with those older folks and folks with disabilities, and to think about if we're still meeting their needs, how we can do better, what we can adjust, questions like that. So next slide. And that really brings us to the end of our presentation. I thought we were going to have less time, which is why I was kind of speeding through, but we do have some time. We have some time for questions or comments if anyone would like to say anything.
Rob, go ahead.
I have a stupid and naive question. What is a cutaway bus?
A cutaway bus is a shorter bus. So a lot of our RideSource vehicles that you see on the street, those are cutaway buses.
Told you that. They literally
Good question.
like chop shot, like they were like a bigger bus, and they literally got cut and like shrunk, or is it just a term of art?
I think it's more of a mechanical process, but something like that. Peter?
Yeah, thanks, Carrie and David, for this. Seeing that you guys are coordinating with other agencies on purchasing, I was wondering if you've talked to the city of Eugene about coordinating for buying an accessible taxi, because I know they've been interested in that, and you mentioned accessible minivans. And the other thing, the accessible minivans is Duck Rides purchases a lot of accessible vehicles, and I wonder if they might be interested in coordinating as well in this purchasing process.
Yes, we are talking with the city of Eugene about providing some accessible type of service. I'm not the best person to answer that question, so I'm going to phone a friend.
So on the accessible taxi question, so we're having ongoing conversations with the city. In fact, we just met with them yesterday to talk about some potential opportunities for coordination. That's what this plan is all about. And so I think that's a good example of a priority that I think will filter up into this plan. And we're taking steps right now to see if there's a way to set up a program that would meet that need within not just Eugene, but also Springfield. There's sort of it's not overly complex, but there's a sort of complicated regulatory environment that the city leads and Springfield is partner to, and that's part of the conversation as well for TNCs and taxis. So we're working on it. Hopefully we'll have some more information to share in the coming weeks and months.
And for the U of O's accessible services, is there any coordination there as well?
Yeah, I mean, we've had some meetings with U of O fairly recently to learn more about how their not just their shuttle services, but also their relationship with TNCs and how they're doing subsidized TNC rides or medical visits for students. So we're having those conversations, and that is a good sort of content area to highlight.
Thank
you. I just wanted to follow up on the accessible taxi bit. That is definitely something that is very, very needed. A few years ago, I ended up having to go to the ER in the middle of the night. And when I was released, my choices were either to wait until 6 or 7 a.m. and hope that somebody could call a paratransit to come get me. I was released at about 3 a.m. Or I ended up basically pushing myself the 3 miles back home because that was the only way I could get back.
Yeah.
And that sucked.
I mean, there's no doubt it's a big problem in this community that we don't have accessible taxis. So it is, I don't want to get ahead of myself, but I think we'll be able to make some progress here in the coming months and hopefully come up with a solution.
you, Spirit. Claire?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, thanks for this presentation. It's great work to see. And I just had a question on that second example of the medical and non-medical transport. It mentioned that some of that is funded through a contract with or using Medicare dollars. And I'm just curious, and folks who qualify for OHP, so are those rides billed to Medicare, or is anyone able to give me an idea of how that funding piece works?
Yes, billed to Medicaid, and
Medicaid, sorry.
We do have a couple experts in the room that can probably speak to it better than I could. But yeah, that is how it works, is that those trips are billed to Medicaid in a nutshell.
That's fine. That's great. Thank you.
I did just want to throw something out, because we had talked about the STIF program, and just something that's important to mention for the coordinated plan is we are obligated to have a coordinated plan and to maintain a coordinated plan by FTA rules and regulations. And that's specifically linked to, it's 5310, right? So there is a type of federal funding that's specifically for these types of programs called 5310 funds. And so that's really sort of the primary use of the coordinated plan, is to really do a good job in coordinating with our partners and other transit providers, service providers, so that we're getting the best bang for our buck for those dollars, those expenditures. The relationship to STIF is we typically use STIF as match for the 5310 fund. So it's sort of a combination of STIF and federal funds that go into the projects that are in this.
I had just one question, and again, I don't know if this is if we have the answer here or not, but thinking about, we're looking at a heat map, or we're seeing where folks are at and everything, and we know that there's going to be more folks aging. We're coming into like that growth is going to be exponential, and then it'll be small when it gets to Gen X. But as that group is getting bigger, do we know like the and again, I think funding is kind of like a magic wand right now, but do we anticipate more dollars being able to come in to serve and support our aging population?
That's a great question, and I don't know that I have an answer.
Anticipate's a kind of interesting verb.
As I was saying, I was like,
Hope for.
Yeah. And again, just thinking, because when we were talking before about the STIF and thinking about like planning, so that, kind of what LTD does is planning ahead so that we can be requesting dollars as we make your vision and then requesting funds to come in. I've been thinking about that a lot as our community is changing, but it's going to change pretty quick, even more.
That's a keen observation. Somebody mentioned the silver tsunami before.
Yeah,
The baby boomers, being a baby boomer myself, if I can take myself, they've always had it their way. They're a huge demographic bubble, and they vote, and they could be more voter support for that kind of funding in the future.
Yeah, just thinking about the more the need, like those heat maps are gonna, like with the aging part, it's gonna get, the color's gonna change, and anyway, so I don't know if that's, I'm just thinking about that as we think ahead about how we can talk about more funding opportunities and everything.
I don't want to be pessimistic, Alma, but going back to my comments earlier from the Oregon Transit Association, there's a real challenge. I mean, it feels like we've kind of reached the max amount of funding we have statewide for some kinds of transit services. And taxpayers, voters have no appetite to pay anything more. And yet costs to provide existing services are rising, which means that we're able to do less with the money we have. I hope there's a way to go around that, but you said anticipate. I don't know that we could anticipate that right now. I think that we have to work to figure out how to serve needs that we have.
And if I could add on, I think regarding the really robust conversation we had with the fixed route ADA assessment, as well as for this conversation, like we're really focused on seniors and folks with disabilities, but like if we also take into account the needs of other users, that also diversifies the funding sources that maybe we can tap into. Like it's just a matter of, yes, this curb ramp will benefit folks with wheelchairs, but they also benefit other populations. So it's just Sometimes it's just like what message you kind of need to tease out to get that funding source. So great question, great observations. We're trying to spread our eggs and making into multiple baskets to make sure that we're positioned well to take advantage of funding sources when they pop up.
Any other questions for Leon and the team here?
I don't want to end on a negative note. If I can build on what Carrie said, I mean, we've heard that like something like a third of people don't drive regularly. It's not, I mean, it is a minority, but it's not a tiny minority. There's a lot of people who have needs. That needs haven't translated into a political voice to say we should be investing in that. I mean, the statewide conversation acts as if everybody drives, and what we're talking about here tonight is just, frills, sort of luxuries. And that's the way they talk about it. So I think the opportunity is there's to recognize the needs we have and to give voice to that, to tell stories and have that become how policy decisions are made.
Claire?
Yeah, I would just add, I mean, what you were, I think, trying to express, Alma, is that if we're not assessing the needs now so that we can have that story, right, of what is out there in terms of future needs, because as you're pointing out, that demographic heat map's going to get hotter with older folks, with more folks with disabilities as a result of aging. And so if we're not thinking about that and making these plans now, when there is money available and or a shift in the public's thinking about the value of investing in public transportation, which I think is possible, we won't be able to avail ourselves of those resources when they become available. So that's why this kind of thinking ahead, doing the assessment, yes, these are needs we have now, but they're also needs we need to set up to address going forward when the opportunity presents itself.
Thanks for translating that for me, Claire. And I think what Carrie said too is that we did the assessment to know we're in focus. So I appreciate that. And when Rob retires, that he can help us get some policy stuff going.
I keep hearing about.
You said it, so okay. Thank you so much, Carrie and Dan. Appreciate your support. And is there anything else for the good of the order, anyone? All right, well, we have adjourned 10 minutes early. Thank you, everybody who joined us online and everyone who is here. I appreciate it. Rob, you're just gonna have to go into our campaign,